Now, this particular lake that we're fishing today, believe it or not, holds fish to over 40 pounds. However, that is not what we are fishing for. We're on the Specimen Lake at Floatfish Farm, and recently it's been throwing up some massive bags of great quality roach, with some fish to over £2 making an appearance. Now that is just a little fella, but we've got the whole day ahead of us on this water that clearly thrives on neglect, and there's so many big fish specimen waters up and down the UK like this that the roach, the skimmers, the perch, they get completely ignored for 90% of the year, and in the winter you can have some amazing fishing. So it's a privilege to get some permission to come and fish on this lake today. An absolute treat in the winter, and hopefully you can enjoy a great day with us catching some beautiful roach, and there's a chance of a proper giant. Now, if you're coming to a big lake like this, one of the first things you've got to consider is where do you actually fish? And we're lucky today, we're pleasure fishing, there's not anyone else on the lake, but that's often the case in the winter on this kind of venue. So I've chose to sit right in the middle of the lake, and the reason for that is in the winter months, I think them silverfish, they sit in the deepest, most open bit of water. There's not really any features around the edges of this lake. There's not really any massive reed beds or anything like that. And the deepest main body of the lake is where a lot of the smaller fish will sit in the cold weather. So if you're coming to somewhere like this, get yourself in the middle of the lake and you're probably going to have the best chance of catching some fish. And this one feels like another good one. It's definitely a better one than that. Love that head shake on a big roach. The beauty about sitting in the middle of the lake and the main body of it is you can be aggressive with bait. So even if the fish aren't there to start off with, and we had quite a slow start this morning, by feeding you can build it up and bring them in. And look at that, he's definitely a pound plus, maybe a little bit bigger. But that is the sort of fish, when you come on these venues, that you can end up catching. Look at him. There's not many places you can go and catch fish like that nowadays, and anyone who knows me will know that I absolutely love roach, and I absolutely love a big roach. Now that is a really, really cool fish. Proper fishing. So we've established sitting in the middle of the lake where you can really draw them fish to you, if they're not already there, that is. Now, in terms of where to actually fish in the scope of distance, I've opted for 11.5 metres today, and the reason for that is that's the bottom of the slope on this lake. Anyone who's done any silverfish fishing, you'll often find that to catch a big bag of quality silvers, you need to be fishing on a fairly flat bottom, because you can present your ground bait there, you can loose feed some bait, and you can gather a lot of fish on a flat area. And at 11.5 metres where I'm fishing now, that slope ends just before that, so I'm onto the flat base of the lake. And in the winter, fishing in the full depth on that flat bottom is the perfect spot. And being close to the edge of that shelf, I've got that little bit of cover where the slope's going down, but I can present my rig and gather the fish on that nice flat bottom. So bottom of the slope, full depth of the lake, if you can find it, that's the place to target. When it comes to kicking off a session for these kind of fish, I always like to introduce some ground bait. I think fish like roach, they love rooting around and they'll hover over a bed of ground bait for a long time. And this particular venue, like I've mentioned, it's a specimen carp water, so it sees a lot of boilies and pellets and fish meal based bait. So I've opted for a fish meal based ground bait. I've gone for 50-50 bagger mix and F1 dark, which is a nice balance of sweetness and dark colour from the F1, but also some strong fishy pellet flavour from the bagger mix. And it makes a lovely sweet fish meal ground bait that these little fellas, absolutely love. They're used to the taste of pellets and boilies from the clientele that fish these places, and by using a ground bait, it's got a little bit of sweetness, which these like, but also that familiar fishiness. It's lovely, and that particular ground bait makes like a dark greenish coloration, and in the winter in clear water, using something that's got a darker edge to it or a little bit of a green tinge just camouflages it a little bit on the bottom, and they'll feel nice and safe over the top of it. So at the start, I just cupped in 3 big soft balls of that ground bait, and the reason for making them soft, even though it's 12 foot deep where I'm fishing, is I wanted them to go down and break up straight away. As that ground bait's breaking up, it's releasing a lot of the smell, releasing the bait. Fish can hear it popping, crackling, it'll give off a little bit of cloud, and what that does is maximises the pull that it's got at the start. So I'm on this massive lake. If I potted them balls in rock hard, there's not a lot of attraction there. Whereas feeding them soft means I've got them down to the bottom, then they quickly break up and create this nice bed that fish can smell. It spreads out, they can come and settle on top of it, and just feeding them a little bit softer, just with one gentle nip, just gives you that extra attraction and gets that ground bait working for you. So 3 balls to kick it off, nice and soft, and in them 3 balls I put a little handful of chopped worms and a little bit of chopped sweet corn in with that, just because I know a lot of the carp anglers on here will use corn, and a few casters as well, and that sets up the base that we're going to fish over to start with. And then I've got the ground bait next to me, and if I feel like I need to introduce a little bit more as today goes on, I can tweak it, add a bit of bait to it, and top up with it as and how I feel is best. So I'm going to loose feed a few maggots to start with, see how we get on, and we'll probably end up topping up with some ground bait a little bit later as well. Now, loose feeding is a very important part of silverfish fishing, and it goes hand in hand with using the ground bait. Ground bait makes a perfect bed on the bottom and a base area to gather fish, but once you've put that initial ground bait in, you need to keep drawing new fish into the swim and keep feeding the ones that are already there. And as you can see, there's a lot of mouths here at the minute. There's a lot of fish eating that bait, so to keep them there, I've got to keep bait going in the swim. And by loose feeding, I'm loose feeding just red maggots today. What that does is it makes a noise on the surface. I'm feeding quite aggressive, like half a pouch of maggots twice every time that I ship out. And the reason for that is because I want a lot of fish gathered in the swim. And the last thing I need to happen is, in a match situation or if I'm fishing competitively, other people feeding and nicking them. So every time I ship out, I put the rig in, sort of half fill the pouch of my catapult and feed it once, and then I'll half fill it again and feed it again a few seconds later. And the reason for feeding twice is that gives me 2 little batches of maggots falling through. Plenty of them, and as you can see, I'm getting bites straight away, so I know that every one of them is probably getting eaten before they even get to the deck. But the fact that I've got that big column of maggots falling through, look at them, proper fish, beautiful. The fact I've got that big column of maggots falling through the water constantly means that fish can see them, they can come into them, and they'll follow them down to the bottom where my hook bait is and my rig is, and also where that bed of ground bait is, and that is where hopefully they will stay. And generally you find, especially when it comes to roach, you catch the biggest ones on the bottom, but just as that rig settles, and that is because you're following that bait down, the loose feed, you keep dipping in and nicking a bit of particle out of the ground bait, and a lot of the bites will come just as that rig is settling. And if you can get yourself into a rhythm of popping the rig in, and just while that float's settling now, again, I'm going to half fill my catapult, fire it in, same again. And what you'll notice is when I loose feed, I'm trying to loose feed so that most of them land just this side of my float and a few of the maggots just tickle onto it. So I'm always fishing just on that little bit of a back edge of the bait. And by doing that, your hook bait stands out a little bit more. It's not right amongst the mass of the maggots, and you tend to get a bite pretty quick. Now, the actual rigs that I've set up and I'm using today reflect the way I'm fishing and feeding, and I've already mentioned that loose feed, that bait's constantly falling through the water, and the bottom end of both the rigs really reflect that. I've got two set up. This is the heavier one, and it's 1.5 grams in weight, and this has been the best one so far, to be fair. The nice thing about a heavy float in this depth of water is you can get your rig in position perfect, but a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that they've got to use a heavy float and have it shotted very heavily in the very bottom end of it, and that is not the case at all. Now, I've actually got a big bulk of number 8s on here, but they're probably 75 centimetres from my hook itself, and the reason for that is I need that weight to get the rig in position and get it down in this wind and the depth, but then the bottom end of it has just got 5 number 9s getting further and further apart as it goes down, so the actual finesse and bottom end of the rig is quite delicate. I can get that bait down to the killing zone where them roach are eating the maggots, but then this bottom bit will fall in nice and slow, giving the fish a chance to see the hook bait. They'll come down, and that's why a lot of the bites come just as that rig settles. Now, the other rig I've got, it's 0.5 gram lighter, it's 1 gram in weight, and that's strung out in the bottom half of the rig, and I set that up in case the fishing were tricky and we needed to maybe catch them on the drop if they were really in the loose feed, but they're clearly on top of that ground bait and they're enjoying the loose feed falling in on them. And this 1.5 gram rig with that bulk and then a nice spread of shots in the bottom 75 centimetres below it is doing the trick. And in terms of lines and hook lengths, I've got 0.13 mainline on there, an 0.10 hook length and a size 16 F1 maggot with 2 maggots. And elastic is a number 8. It's a little bit of a prototype we've got on the go. Hopefully it'll be out March time. It's a solid number 8. I like solid elastics for roach fishing, especially in deep water. Like I've said, it's 12 foot today, and having that solid number 8 elastic means I can set the hook into the fish, not too much elastic's going to come out, and I've got control over them, but it's not too heavy that it's going to bump them off. And in terms of putting the rig in the water, I'm literally shipping out, dropping the bulk where I want my float to be, and then laying the float to one side. And while that rig's settling, like I've already showed you, gives you a little bit of time to loose feed some maggots just short of your float. And just as I'm about to put my catapult down, them last few shots are just going to be trimming up and settling so you're ready for a bite. So having a rig set up in that way, it allows you to get into a lovely rhythm of putting the rig in and loose feeding, and hopefully you'll get a bite pretty quick and you can really settle in to catching some fish. One thing that I definitely couldn't be without when I'm fishing big lakes like this is gentleman's rest, spray bar, pole roost, whatever you want to call it, in front of you. And even on days that aren't that windy, I'll often use one of these just because it makes, in this deep water in particular, makes my life nice and easy in terms of feeding. I can ship my pole out, drop it on that rest and leave both my hands free to loose feed my maggots. And what I also like about it, hey up, that's a little rud, that one, is when you are putting your rig in on these venues, you can actually hold the float nice and tight, and most importantly, you can hold it still. And I think that's quite important when you're trying to present a bait for roach. If you're trying to hold the pole in a breezy condition like we've got today, you're constantly tweaking and moving your float a little bit, and that'll be actually moving your hook bait. Whereas if you can pop your rig in, lay the float to one side and just hold that still on the rest, because your pole's sat on the rest, your float will stay still as it falls in and you get a nice smooth fall of the bait. And as I've already said, what I like about it, you can leave both hands free to fire some maggots nice and accurate just this side of your float, and then you're set and ready to fish. And just because you use, look at that, as it's fallen in, we've got one. And that is why that rest is so important. If I were tweaking my bait and jerking it because of the wind, I probably wouldn't have caught that fish. So a spray bar, a lot of people think they're for ligging on for bream and holding a bait still for big fish, but I use them so much in my fishing, not only to hold the rig static once I'm out there ligging on the bottom, but also to help it fall in nice and smoothly. And I've actually got today 3 or 4 inches of line on the bottom, And if I don't get a bite as it falls in, like that last one, I'll happily just lift the float up 18 inches, 2 foot, and drop it back in. And what that does, because of the way that rig's shotted, it means my bait lifts off the bottom and it just drops back into the swim like that loose feed. And often there'll be loads of fish above your ground bait picking off the bits of loose feed, and if they just see your bait lift up and fall back in, that's enough just to entice one to take it. So just because you're using a spray bite doesn't mean you've got to be lazy and sit there with your rig completely static. What it means is you can get a perfect smooth fall in and catch the fish on the drop. You can hold the rig still on top of the bait and wait for a better one, but don't get too preoccupied doing that. You can also pick the float back out and lay it in so one can see it. So yeah, piece of kit I definitely wouldn't be without this time of year is that little gentleman's rest. It's a lifesaver, definitely catches me a lot more fish. In terms of hook baits, there's loads of different options, but if you're catching good stamp fish, which these fish are absolutely awesome, I mean, some of them that are only 6 ounce, we've been calling small ones today, and there's not that many small nuisance fish here, so I'm fishing with 2 maggots on a size 16 hook. If I really wanted to single out big fish and little fish were a problem, that's where things like slipping a caster on or even double caster can be good. The only problem with casters in deep water when there is a lot of fish is you only really get 1 bite at the cherry. What I mean by that is if you drop your rig in and you get one of them little indications on the drop, you're always worried that your caster's burst or it's not presented properly anymore. So when that's the case, a hook bait that can be absolutely brilliant is the head of a worm. And I'm talking, you know, not a quarter of a worm, just a very tiny little sort of 1.5 cm, 2 centimetre piece. And the reason that's so good is, I think, 1, it actually looks like a caster. 2, it's very, very durable. So if you miss a bite or 2, you can drop your rig back in knowing your hook bait's fine. And also when you're really bagging, you can catch 3 or 4 fish on the same hook bait. But also, there's something about a worm head that big roach love. I don't know what it is, but they often suck it in and just will not let go of it. So if nuisance fish or small fish are a problem, have a little go on casters. I might put a worm head on now, look, got a little rud. But also, don't forget that worm head. And when a worm head is good on the hook, worms can be a brilliant bait to feed as well. Roach absolutely love them, and generally on warmer days, or when there's a lot of big roach kicking about, putting a few worms into your top up can be absolutely brilliant. So if you're bagging loads of fish, you can't beat single and double maggot. If you want to single out some bigger fish, try a caster, or even better, try a little tiny head of a worm. Weirdly, I've just had like a great spell of catching, and this often happens when you're catching a lot of roach, but the stamp has definitely gone a little bit smaller. Still, still beautiful fish. I'd be more than happy catching them on a lot of venues, but often what you find is when your bait's running out, and what I mean by that is the ground bait on the bottom, the worms, the bit of corn, that main bed of bait, when that's thinning out, and 2 hours in we've just had a brilliant spell of catching, you often get this great spell where there's a lot of competition in the peg, you catch a few better fish, but then you get this lull. You wait a little bit longer for bites, and often that's followed by a little reduction in the stamp of fish, and that is a telltale sign that the bait is thinning out. And that, for me, is what answers a lot of questions to a lot of people. When do you top up? Now, keeping on top of it and trying to read that is really important, and a little spell where bite's slow followed by a reduction in size of fish often means it needs a top up. So after feeding them 3 balls at the start, I've not put anything else in yet, but I'm just going to reset that bed of bait with a nice ball of ground bait. And because the fish have been such good stamp today, I'm just going to put in it a nice fresh blob of chopped worms and chopped corn, because I think we might get another good run of quality ones if we do that. It'll just refocus them, put a nice fresh bit of ground bait on the bottom, and it'll also reset that bed of feed down there. So at the minute, them loose feed maggots are obviously doing the trick and drawing fish in constantly, but if there's not that bait actually set on the bottom as well, fish can often come up, and there's so many there, or there's so many in this lake, that can easily happen. So smaller fish have come in, waiting a bit longer for bites, just going to reset and top up with another little ball. And on a typical session, you might do this 4, 5, 6 times, but what I would say is the fish will tell you when to do it. If you're catching a quality one every chuck in, you don't need to worry about it, but as soon as they go a little bit smaller, or you start to get spells where there's not as many there, don't be afraid to top up, and definitely keep loose feeding as well. Well, they've really come to that topping up now, and I keep getting an odd run of smaller ones, and that's the telltale sign to sneak in that other top up ball. Probably done it 3 or 4 times now already, but you definitely sort of refocus them, and literally in every top up I'm just putting like a little palmful of really finely minced worms with a few pieces of corn, and I've actually started putting in a very few micro pellets as well, just as well as the casters, just to maximise the amount of particles on the bottom. Now, if I'd have done that at the start, I think it'd have been a bit dodgy, because I'd have had that much bait in the swim. It'd have took them a long time to start eating it, but once you've got them there competing with that loose feed, you can gradually build up the swim, and that's what roach fishing on big deep waters like this is all about. A little bit of patience at the start, getting the right line to fish on to begin with, the right distance out on that flat bottom, and setting a bed, then working away, loose feeding, building it up, topping it up, and now it is literally a fish every single chuck in, and they're an absolutely brilliant stamp, sort of anything from 3 ounce to over a pound we've had today. And just this last sort of part of the session, a worm head has been a brilliant hook bait. I don't have to change it every time, sort of a 1.5 cm piece of worm, and as you can see, the stamp of the fish, it is beautiful. I can just about maybe swing that one. Oh, look at them. Wouldn't have swung him in a match, but they're cracking fish, and that is the key to catching roach on big waters, is not going guns blazing at the start, but being the angler that stays busy, keeps loose feeding and builds up that swim. And it's took us a couple of hours to get it this good, but that combination of ground bait at the start, loose feed, and then refocusing them with topping up has been absolutely brilliant. Well, the fishing has been absolutely exceptional. It's got a bit wild, a bit blustery, and to say we're in the depths of winter, we've had an incredible day's silverfish fishing, and it just goes to show the power or the adventure that these completely untouched specimen lakes offer when it comes to roach, or any silverfish, to be fair. They're absolutely gorgeous fish. There's so many of them, and most of them have never even seen a nook before. There's places like this literally littered up and down the country. So have a little look at some that are close to you, get some permission to go and have a fish on your local specimen lake, and see if it's got any hidden surprises like this. What a day's fishing.